Welcome back to the Politics and Media Show. The local MP and the campaign group Cardiff Citizens have started a series of protests aimed at getting the Nando's restaurant in the city to serve halal food. Nando's provide this service in other cities and the campaigners want the provision extended to Cardiff. They say a promise by Nando's last December of a meeting to discuss the issue has not materialised. With a Muslim population that rose to 6.8% of the population, according to the last census, the campaigners say an important opportunity for integration is being overlooked. The Islam Channel went to Cardiff to meet some of the campaigners. Let's take a look at what they had to say.
One of the fundamentals of socialising is eating. So what do you do when you can't eat in your favourite restaurant with friends of different religions? That's the problem that's facing Muslims in Cardiff. Half the Muslim population of Wales lives in Cardiff, yet not one of the 3 Nando's in the area serve halal food. Cardiff Citizens UK launched a campaign to protest this.
If Nando's goes halal, it's not that only Muslims can eat it, it's a whole community can eat it, and it's fair on all of us, you know, really.
There's such a large Muslim community here, and it feels like we're not really truly part of the community whilst we could be with other places and share like enjoyment such as just eating chicken. And I feel like we're being left out.
Because everybody need to be equal, because it doesn't matter, you know, what race, what, you know, where you're from or anything like that, because end of the day, you're meant to just be comfortable with each other and get on well, and you know, eat from somewhere that, you know, you're both welcome to.
We love Cardiff, we love Nando's.
There are 75 Nando's restaurants in London, and 21 of them are halal. Yet Cardiff's Muslims have to travel 10 miles if they want to eat Nando's chicken. Some of the protesters here were doing just that and running the distance, dressed as chickens.
We ran a listening campaign last year. We were basically asking people what pressures they face living in the community or living in Cardiff. And what was significant was the fact that there was a lack of halal provision in the local community. And this area, particularly in Cardiff Bay, is a very nice place. You know, you can see now it's a nice summer day, everyone's out, you know, and you won't see many young people felt that they were representative in this area. And when we asked, when we prompted them further, it was the fact that there was no eateries that was accustomed to them.
This chicken run represents a broader issue of social exclusion within the UK's cities. Restaurants with halal options are few and far between in Cardiff Bay, an area where most of the Muslims in Cardiff live. While government ministers focus debates on integration, are they missing a key component which could help prevent segregation? Or would adapting restaurants to accommodate Muslim values be a betrayal to secular Brits? Nando's has yet to be convinced of the merits. The company said they appreciate having loyal customers and really value their feedback. But Nando's told Islam Channel, whilst not the only factor in selecting the restaurants that serve halal chicken, population size and density is clearly a highly influencing one. 2011 census data shows that the Muslim population in the Cardiff area is not at the level where we would automatically change our chicken supply. However, we are not ruling out the possibility of this happening at some point in the future, either in an existing restaurant or any potential future sites. The Nando's campaign has become symbolic among Cardiff's Muslims of whether they will gain access to mainstream society or be sidelined. As it stands, Nando's are taking a gamble by ignoring their Muslim customers in Cardiff, and if they fail to engage in dialogue, there is some talk of organising a nationwide boycott. Nando's may soon see their chickens coming home to roost. Charlotte Hawkins, Islam Channel.
Well, as we saw there, this campaign throws up wider questions about integration. Do Muslims have the right to demand that the restaurants serve halal, or should this simply be a decision by the business owner themselves? And what about the rights of those who don't want to eat halal? With me in the studio are Jonathan Cox from Citizens UK, Catherine Heseltine from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK, and Bob Churchill, Communications Officer of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. On Skype, we're joined by Saleem Kidwai, the General Secretary of the Muslim Council of Wales. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Jonathan, your organisation is part of the campaign. Do you think this is something that it's very important that gets settled in Cardiff?
Absolutely. And I think perhaps what the report didn't bring over was that it's not just young Muslims who are calling for this provision. We have a letter signed by about 14 different community leaders in the city, half of whom are non-Muslim. We have representatives from most of the major church denominations, the Catholics and the Anglicans, the Free Churches, the United Reformed Church, the local university, and so on. So this is not just about Muslims demanding something. This is really about social cohesion. It's about, in a city where 7.6% of the population are Muslims, that's 1 in every 14 people are Muslim, do they have access to places that they can eat in the main leisure places in the city, like Cardiff Bay, which has had £2.4 billion worth of money spent on it? Is that a place that Muslims can be and enjoy themselves? And can we provide spaces, particularly for our young people, where, so many of the schools now, people have Muslim and Christian friends and people have no faith. Surely everybody could agree that it would be good for them to have places that they can socialise together. And Nando's would be a great place to do that.
Catherine, is that your view, or do you think that maybe Nando's have got a point and say, well, let's wait until the population reaches a certain percentage and then we'll think about it?
Well, with a business, it's not like a school or a hospital where you can make a clearer case. At the end of the day, they've got a bottom line with profit. But what I do think is great is that we're seeing a lot of young people here seeing something they don't like, and rather than just moaning to their mates about it, they're getting up and trying to do something to change it. And again, what is brilliant to see is Muslims and non-Muslims working together on this campaign. Mosques working with churches is absolutely brilliant. But I do think we've got to put it in context. There are bigger problems Muslims are facing, and coming from an organisation like MPAC, where we're campaigning on Palestine, on Guantanamo, civil rights. We've got to remember that unless you're a chicken, this is not a life and death issue. I hope these young people will move on to get involved in wider campaigns and even more serious issues, although I do appreciate integration is important. But for me, the really serious question is, why would a restaurant like Nando's not automatically want to serve halal? Because they're losing Muslim customers, and the answer has got to be they must think that they'll lose more non-Muslim customers who are put off halal meat. And we've got to look at the way that halal is talked about in a lot of the mainstream media as some kind of like bloodthirsty ritual, cruel, barbaric treatment of animals, and the way that it's often, halal is bashed and targeted, and animal rights issues like the way that chickens are battery farmed is ignored by those same people who are just using halal as another means to attack Muslims.
That's a fair point, that this gets disproportionate kind of negative coverage in a way that, say, the preparation of kosher food wouldn't.
I think that the issues about ritual slaughter of animals for food apply equally to kosher and to halal food. I think the first thing to say is that I completely agree with the tone of the campaign that's being made here. That it's about integrating people and social inclusion. No one can object to that. No one, I certainly would not. That there should be segregation in the Nando's and Cardiff or anything like that. But as my friend said, there are much more important issues. But even on the issue of halal food, if it's being made the focus of a campaign, then I think, as the report at the beginning suggested, there are ethical concerns, and I think it's wrong to sort of dismiss them as simply an attack on Muslims. The kind of people who raise ethical objections to halal food are not necessarily bigoted in so doing. There are still ethical concerns. The PCA doesn't like the stunning of animals, and that's not always the case in halal food production, but it's certainly an aspect of some proportion of halal food, more so in kosher food. The RSPCA I mentioned, the Farm Animals Welfare Association has similar objections. They don't like the scientific evidence suggests that if we do not stun animals first, then the suffering that they experience when slaughtered is worse. And I think it's very wrong to sort of pass that off as an objection of a bigot. We saw the same thing in the fox hunting debate a few years ago, some of the people campaigning in favour of retaining fox hunting said, "Oh, this is just an attack on us as a sort of class warfare issue," and sort of dismissed the ethical concerns of people campaigning
I don't think
against.
you can look at some of the press coverage and and say, yes, I'm not saying the RSPCA has got an agenda against Muslims, but if you look at what some commentators are saying about halal and the way that they pick that, in newspapers it's often picked out and kosher is not mentioned. There you've got to see that this can be used as a way to attack Muslims in a really pernicious way.
It can be, but on the reverse side, I think it would be a shame if an issue that clearly does have an ethical dimension, whereby you cannot simply defend it as a neutral. It's not like
we should be able to have a debate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a shame if that became the focus of.
Sorry, Bob, finish your point. Yeah.
It's a shame if that became the focus of inclusion entirely, because then people who have no wish to use it as a weapon against the Muslim community will see the only issue being, well, not the only issue, but one of the major issues being talked about in terms of social exclusion. And sort of actually, I have what I see myself as an objective ethical objection to production of meat in that way that seems to be backed up by the scientific evidence, the relevant EU Parliamentary Committee, RSPCA, Farm Animals Welfare.
And again, I don't think any Muslims want to force non-Muslims to eat halal meat if they don't want to.
Yeah, we'll come back to this, but just let me bring Saleem in a moment, because perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the background to the campaign. It seems that it's a pretty kind of grassroots thing here that people got together because they have a kind of concern about somewhere they'd like to be. Is that how it sprang up?
It is indeed, yes, because it's not only confined to the Muslim community, as John has mentioned. It is cross-section of the community, and the area which we are targeting, Cardiff Bay, is where majority of the Muslims lives there too. So they feel that they are a part of the community, and the big organization should have a feel of what their needs are. And as the university, the churches, we are all together in it. And what we want to make it, people wants to go out in the evening to have a meal, few friends, and if few Muslim friends can't go in a particular restaurant because they don't provide any alternative, then it is exclusion, and when we are trying to talk about social cohesion and community cohesion, I think it is a very important factor, particularly for the youth, As you know, that Muslim, you don't go to pubs mostly, and clubbing, so dinner is one place where they can sit together and talk about things and meet their friends and talk about it. So, particularly among the students' community and the general community on whole.
Jonathan, I mean, it may be, as Bob says, that there's a kind of different debate that could be had about a kind of animal welfare-based debate, but presumably this isn't Nando's problem, because there are Nando's restaurants that are halal. So what do you think the issue is? Why are they sticking on this? It seems a bit hard to fathom.
Well, I think part of it, John, is because there are 4 Nando's restaurants in South Wales. 3 of them are in Cardiff. And one is, this is the whole point of the action, is that these young people were doing a chicken run. They were running from where they were. The irony is if you're a young person growing up in Cardiff and a group of people going out and it's some Muslims and some non-Muslims together, you can't eat at any of the 3 Nando's in the city, and you have to go 10 miles out of the city, a place that's very difficult to get to by public transport, so automatically excludes anyone who's
at
Nantgarw, which is in the Welsh Valleys, which is where I'm from, where the Muslim population is 0.05%, and there are no mosques, and it's in the middle of an industrial estate.
So what? Well, I mean, I'm not asking you to sort of penetrate the inner workings of Nando's management here, but what do you think they're thinking?
I think it's also partly the sequencing. I think that was probably one of the earlier Nando's, so actually this perhaps was Nando's being progressive in those early days and providing one of the 2 locally. The problem now is that we have 4 in the area and in the wider area, and now and 3 in Cardiff. And so it makes obvious sense it would make much more sense to make one of the ones in the city or in the Bay Area halal, and to make the other one not halal, or to have 2. I don't think it really matters. One thing we should say is that since the package was presented, was made up, Nando's have offered a meeting. So they will, their senior manager, we should give them credit, have come, they will come down to Cardiff to meet with a group of people in July, and we hope that we will be able to develop a constructive dialogue with them to try and address the situation. Because we think when they come, when they hear from the young people and see the particular context there is in Cardiff and South Wales, I think it'll also strike them as a bit strange as well. And with the support of the council, the MP, the assembly member, and it should be said, about 400 non-Muslims who on that day we did the chicken run, we went out and spoke to about this. And I have to say, only a tiny percentage raised the issue of the ethical preparation of the around halal. And that when they did, that was a really good space to have a conversation. And so part of what we're doing, I take the point about this isn't Palestine and this isn't Guantanamo, but it is a way in which young Muslims and young non-Muslims are able to come together to wrestle with an issue which matters to them and which they can see a tangible outcome, and we hope will help develop them into a stronger sense of citizenship, so that absolutely they will go on and work on other issues together that they can do together.
Does illustrate that every aspect of our lives is connected to politics, and if we're not active politically, and if we don't look outside of our own little boxes like that, then yeah, even the food on your plate, is a classic example of this. I mean, I honestly believe that if it weren't for the efforts of the Jewish community in campaigning for, religious slaughter and the right to kosher meat, then halal Muslims have not made that same effort to campaign for the right to halal meat. If it wasn't for Jewish organisations lobbying politicians, being active in the media, I don't think religious slaughter would necessarily still be legal in the UK, because there are strong campaigns to say that it should be banned, it should be outlawed, and then it's not only a question of whether you can get it in Nando's, it's whether you can get it anywhere. And I think a lot of Muslims, we think politics has nothing to do with our lives, our practice of our religion. It has everything to do with not only the rights of our brothers and sisters around the world, but our very simple rights here in the UK.
And also provides some great opportunities for us to work out the common good. One of the things that Citizens does is it's an alliance of existing organisations, and we very deliberately bring together churches and mosques and schools and people of faith and no faith to come together and try and wrestle with some of the difficult things, not the things that necessarily divide us, but what binds us at a local level. And this was the really interesting thing, is that we didn't know this was going to happen, but out of this big listening campaign that was done last year, the stories of Muslims who talked about what it was like not to be able to fully participate in the life of the city, that has made non-Muslims say, well, we want to stand in solidarity with you. We want to be with you in making sure you are a part of the city now and in the future.
Bob, do you think Nando's have just kind of got caught in the stupid corner here? Because, I mean, it isn't every day that you hear about customers hammering on the door of Nando's to get in. Surely the sensible thing would have been to just go with this, as they have done in other places.
Yeah, I don't understand, in some sense, the focus on Nando's as if it was as you mentioned, it's not the same as a local authority or something that we need access to. But I completely understand and sympathise with that image that's being painted of people not being able to eat with their friends. It's a very emotive one. But actually, you mentioned that some of the right-wing press, for example, will demonise halal food, but and you mentioned that in fact very few of the young people raise those ethical issues. And I think one thing that shows, first and foremost, is that hopefully young people aren't reading the Daily Mail. But the other thing is that then that ethical debate maybe hasn't been had enough, because, again, while sympathising very, very much with the social cohesive aims and the activism aims of the project, I think it's a real shame if we ignore the ethical, scientific consensus that was already established. And there is a secularist argument to make here. The EU and the UK have laws and standards on food production, and effectively you talked in terms of halal food, whether or not it would be legal or not, and certainly if there wasn't a religious exemption purely on religious grounds, then it would be considered unethical and against animal rights and animal welfare. So it is an issue where already, in fact, religious groups, quasi-religious groups, have been given a exemption from laws that were not developed in order to persecute anyone or to delimit anyone. They were developed in order to take into account the rights and welfare of animals. So all for social inclusion, but there's a part of me that feels bad that young people are being asked to motivate behind a campaign that actually is against, in my view, is against the ethical thrust in terms of the food on their plates. I'd much rather see a campaign that was trying to make sure that Nando's wasn't battery farming chickens or abusing them more generally in the food manufacture process, and certainly not to see one that in effect is campaigning for them to perhaps, depending on the supplier, be produced in a way which is deeply worrying and unethical if they're suffering unduly merely to make up for a religious right.
Saleem, how was it exactly that the campaign started? Because, I mean, people have said, all right, it's not the greatest issue in the world, and Bob's said, look, there are some other issues that perhaps he would prefer people to be campaigning around. What was it exactly that got people started on this?
I think it was a group of youngsters, who did sort of a baseline research, talking to the people within that area, which started it, that this is one of the things, as you know, I don't know about England, but in Wales, particularly in Cardiff, Nando is very popular among the youth. The one halal restaurant 10 miles away is always full with youngsters. And that's how they started talking and taking a baseline research type, individuals, and that they found that it was one issue which was on everybody's mind, as you may call it, youth are youth. To them, it is important that they have got a space where they can meet together and talk together and share things together. And that's how it started, and Citizen UK was very much involved in our activities at the time. So they took this ahead.
Okay, thanks. John, do you think there's a debate that Bob is clearly interested in having? It's a legitimate debate. Do you think that in this context it's almost an impossible debate to have because of the way in which this issue is skewed by the press treatment and the public perception, which comes from a much bigger political dynamic in the society?
Well, again, I would challenge that in that there is a debate. Clearly, there's a debate to be had. People have different positions, and we live in a democracy, and those views should be heard, and we should be able to take those into consideration. It just wasn't borne out. We, as I said, the young people went out into Cardiff Bay, and they spoke to 400 people in the course of that afternoon. And the numbers who raised this, so I also don't think it's kind of even really on the radar of kind of your average person going out for a walk on a Saturday with their family to enjoy Cardiff Bay. People, and I'm sure there are people for whom the animal rights stuff is hugely important, but actually for most people they were more concerned about people being excluded from something in their city, and something that there is undoubtedly concern there, I think, in the city about Muslims not being pushed out. I think nobody wants to see segregation because nobody wants to see any kind of ghettoisation or people given an excuse to be radicalised or anything like that. People want to be...
And in the restaurants where halal is available, obviously the option of non-halal is also available, so that there isn't an exclusion working the other way.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think the restaurants that Nando's operate, I think, have to be exclusively halal. I think
one way or the other.
A veggie option.
Right, exactly. So there's a veggie option, which is often what is said now to Muslims if they want to eat there. But also in a place like Cardiff, we're not asking for all of the 3 restaurants to be halal by any stretch of the imagination. Just one would be nice. And then if people do have ethical considerations, they can make their choice and they can choose between one of the 2 restaurants in the town. But there will be one at least where Muslims and friends of Muslims can come together and eat together.
I think it's very interesting here how you're sort of putting ethical considerations as if they were just a sort of alternate lifestyle choice that people might make, like they wear a different hat or have a different religion. If there are ethical considerations, and as I say, the scientific evidential consensus is definitely that there are, then that can't just be dismissed as, well, if some people feel like this, that or the other, then maybe it's a concern. That would be a case to say that no restaurant, no in a chain should have halal meat or whichever kind of meat was being discussed.
Well,
and of course,
we
can't have restaurants for all of them.
Because we're running out of time. I hope that you've enjoyed the discussion on the Politics and Media programme this week and that you'll rejoin us next week for another edition of the show.